So, I've talked a lot about how we've been really focused on doing post-fire restoration, and I'm really excited because this past year we've been able to start thinking and actually planning and doing stuff about the future aspects. And so we've been working on a pilot project with Nature Conservancy, Wildlands Restoration Volunteers, Larimer County Conservation Corps, and the Boy Scout Ranch in Red Feather Lakes to work on a pilot Sawyer project where we're integrating professional sawyers from the Nature Conservancy with newly trained Conservation Corps sawyers, and we're giving chainsaws to volunteers, which may not seem like a big deal to you, but it's not a common thing to do. So Wildlands Restoration Volunteers has been developing a training program to certify volunteer sawyers, and we're working on making sure that we have good opportunities and consistent opportunities to make sure that volunteer sawyers are used effectively and efficiently and safely and help us get more capacity into our watershed to treat more acreages. So we're really, really lucky that we have a board member who's, some of you may have met, Bob Sturdivant. He teaches here, I think in the forestry department. He's also a member of the American Society for Foresters, or Society of American Foresters, but he also happens to be the conservation director for the Boy Scout Ranch, which, if you guys haven't been up in that area, it's a 3,200 acre piece of property in Red Feather Lakes. And it was recently put under a long-term conservation easement, and one of the major aspects of the conservation plan was addressing wildfire fuel loading and forest health on that piece of property. It's one of the last largest contiguous pieces of private land in the watershed. So it's really important. It sits between Forest Service land and a bunch of communities on the North Fork. And so understanding and reducing fuel loads and using that as an opportunity to reduce risk and outcome in our region is a really fantastic opportunity. And so we're really lucky that they basically gave us a free hand to be like, find the high priority areas on our property and go for it. Try doing some treatments, work with the volunteers, do some stuff with the Youth Corps, and develop a program. So we, this summer, had a series of weeks where we were out there with Youth Corps, Wildlands Restoration Volunteer sawyers, and Nature Conservancy, basically thinning trees. And then trying to deal with the issue of you've thinned a bunch of trees, now what do you do with it? Because you can't just leave it there because you don't really change your fuel load. So I'm really excited about this because it's been our first effort to actually think about the future and protecting the forest as opposed to being reactionary to something bad that's already happened. And as I alluded to earlier, even though our initial sort of footprint when we first formed was the upper watershed, we are now working with stakeholders in the lower watershed to think about river corridor planning. In the post-flood 2013 environment, there's been a lot of issues. We did not, in our portion of the watershed, we did not see the impacts that Big Thompson, St. Vrain, and South saw. We did not see that level of destruction in the upper watershed and through Fort Collins, largely because we just didn't get as much rain. In part through the urban portions of Fort Collins, it's also because Fort Collins has done a really great job of creating more floodplain space, so it's not quite as constrained as it is in some of the other parts that saw more rainwater. But in the lower watershed, that event did deliver a lot of sediment into the river channel. So it's not so much that the September 2013 event itself caused a lot of destruction. It did cause destruction in the lower watershed, but it has changed that corridor. And since September 2013, there's been consistent problems with flooding and problems in the floodplain. And so we're going to be working with the lower watershed stakeholders to try and do a master plan for that river corridor to address some of those recovery and restoration needs and try and integrate recreation and habitat restoration into that process. So those are some of the things that I'm excited and also somewhat terrified about, but it's where we're moving right now. And I wanted to close on two thoughts. One, which is my favorite quotation about watersheds, and I think really encapsulates not just watersheds and the ecological processes, but that notion that we are part of watersheds. Watersheds are part of our communities. And so if I'm going to go out on a limb and assume most of you know who John Wesley Powell is, but at one point, John Wesley Powell wanted our political boundaries to be defined by our watershed boundaries, which would have been the smart thing to do, not politically feasible at the time, but we'd be in the state of Platte if he was right. Only the people on the West Slope would be in the state of Colorado, or if he got his way. But what I really love about this quotation is this notion that it's that integration and really evokes that notion that communities are part of our watersheds and that we are linked to it, and everything that happens in a watershed happens to us. And I wanted to leave on this notion that there's been a lot of natural disasters in our state, and it can be a little bit depressing working on some of these things, because the challenges are big, they're not going away, and we don't have a ton of resources to deal with all of the problems that have been coming at us one after the other, one fire after the other, fire to fire, then floods, locusts. But I think it's important to understand or leave off on the notion that even though we've had all of these challenges, those challenges have really, really changed the conversation in our state about how we approach issues and how we approach the built environment and the natural environment. And it's easy to talk about sustainable development or smart growth, but in Colorado, since these back-to-back disasters, at all levels of government, we've been seeing really dramatic changes in how we're talking about what we're going to do. And after the floods, there was basically a mandate that came down that said, build back better. Because typically what we do is something happens and we just rebuild exactly the way it was before. But there was a mandate that came down from the state, from the governor's office, that said, we're going to build back better. All of us. CDOT, Colorado Water Conservation Board, floodplain managers, restoration resource professionals, our utilities, all of us, we're all going to work towards doing this better. And so there's been numerous efforts to actually make that happen. We're not doing it perfectly. There's certainly things that are not working out the way you might hope, but the state government has changed the way it's driving funding. It's specifically taken funding that is federal and almost always used for just building roads and bridges, and convinced that federal agency to use that money to put towards collaborative watershed planning and collaborative restoration planning, really changing how not only we do implementation and planning in response to these events, but forcing the federal government, who wouldn't otherwise think about using that funding for anything other than building homes and bridges, to really think about how our built infrastructure interacts with our natural infrastructure and how we cannot prevent those damages without integrating how our rivers move, how our forests behave. We can't separate those things anymore. We can't plan in silos. And so I'm not 100% sure how far it'll go and whether it'll be sustained, but I do know that it is changing. And it's changed a lot through the leadership at our state level, but directly in response to the problems that we've seen from the floods and the fires. So I just wanted to leave on that I think that both the collaboration that's been happening has been successful, but it's been recognized that we can get more done and we can do better through that collaboration, and it's being recognized at our state level governments. But we're in a position now as a state to be a leader for the whole nation to show that we can do that. And so no pressure, but I think it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be thinking and working in this environment, given that often, you know, you want to do something progressive and really innovative, but you're usually at loggerheads with at least your state government, if not every other level of government. But here we actually have an opportunity where not only is our state sort of giving us some money to do it, they are a driving force behind helping us do this better. So I think that's exciting, definitely different from other places that I've been in. So I think it's an exciting change, and with that, I'll stop talking.
I feel like we should. Yeah.